This is a little delayed communication about, it's really your third week. This is for, we were talking about in the SIOP book, it's for 826, talking about top 10 things you got from the presentation on best ways to teach. And I wanted to just highlight some of those. Everyone had a list of 10. These lists are very similar. So I thought about posting them, but it'd probably be redundant to do that. Things that I really thought were important. Laura mentioned playtime, and that's always something that I think has to be kept center focus, is that learning is playing. It shouldn't be, it should be directed play, but it should still have the aspect of fun and options. And also wait time, which I noticed several of you highlighted that you speak quickly, and whatever language you speak quickly, and it's several of you. You don't want to speak too artificially slow, but that's usually not the problem with ELs. You want to speak clearly but naturally. You don't want to get weird and get really slow. Emphasis on interactivity was highlighted by most of you, especially in light of continuing to develop their BICs. That you want, essentially you really want academic language to begin to be filtered into the BICs, so that in your interactions you become more sophisticated in expressing yourself to others and discussing issues and problems that we kind of call adult speak or something, but doesn't have to be stilted, but it's very important to keep that. Any kind of, Kagan was mentioned, cooperative learning obviously is huge, not just because it's a useful way to learn, because it's, again, another way to practice the BICs. The students develop, and they have more and more role models, and they become more, what I want to say, extroverted. They become more accustomed to dealing with other people. And that expands both their social network and it expands their listening skills too. Of course, you mentioned in here making the goals explicit. That's what I like about SIOP, because you put up language goals and you put up content goals. And these are huge because students need to know where you're going. You know, you don't want to do a mystery show with that kind of stuff, a little detective novel there. Also, I wrote down as I went through these, take time to pronounce words correctly. Maybe the first time, make it explicit. You're going to see an example in the SIOP about a lady that you may, if you've already watched it, you've probably seen it, but a lady is studying how to find iron in, literally you can find iron in cereal. So they have multigrain Cheerios, and they grind it up, and you can literally stick a magnet in it and find pieces of metal in it, which shocked me. I thought iron was somehow at an atomic level or something, but there's actually iron in there, tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of iron. And she wears the word, and I'm trying to think what the word is. Anyhow, she wears the word that was key to the lesson on her chest, pinned to her, so the kids can see it all the time. Okay, visuals, obviously from Mrs. Amin's video, the one I showed you about the lady teaching with the penguin and the duck. A lot of you added very critical things that maybe aren't found in SIOP. One is to make the class laugh and to enjoy themselves. That's huge. Helps. That's my Three Stooges clock going off. It's now 3 o'clock. I've decided to go whole hog and try to do a lot of these and get caught up on some of these. By the way, these are really interesting to read. I know you don't have time to flip through them because they're really 80 pages long, but I try to shrink them down and take notes. Computers are valuable for tech access. Anything you can do to give them independent practice outside of the teacher being there or in class after hours is big. Now, you had brain breaks, which I don't know if that's a specific thing or a general statement. I assume it probably has something to do with kind of changing the focus and giving students some kind of a fun activity that is challenging but kind of breaks the pace up so it doesn't get monotonous. Scaffolding is big. I think everybody knows what scaffolding is. You build a structure based on what the students know and connect it. So essentially, you give them a little bit of a background in order for them to grasp new things. So for those students who don't know if you were explaining the concept of a political primary in a high school class, people would say primary and they might think elementary school or something, or first. But in fact, it's a type of pre-election that chooses people that are going to run for office. It's kind of like a first stage in the basketball tournament. So you might compare it to something like that, to a playoff, kind of like what we get in March Madness that's coming up. Allow students, a big one I found was allow students to share their language and culture. Anytime you can make a break in there and you can have students teach, this is not actually in any of the documents, but several of you mentioned it, and I think it's big, is to have students share some aspect of their culture. Maybe they could teach greetings in Arabic. Maybe they can, in Spanish, they could introduce some, explain what flan is, F-L-A-N. And gosh, what is the other one? Some of the desserts in Spanish. I can't think. Mole, M-O-L-E, which I think is a dessert, but I'm not really up on. I've never eaten it, so I've always gone for the meat and veggies and all the hot sauce. But things like that, if you can have time, that's really cool. I know that Middle Eastern desserts are delicious. So that's something you could bring up. Dramatic dialogues, I think Gustavo brought that up, using dialogues. It's very useful. And I want to congratulate Amber. You mentioned the joy of learning in here. And it's very important. And you also mentioned working with Shakespeare, that we also have a weekly Shakespearean reading that students have really enjoyed. That sounds like something that would be impossible, Shakespeare and ESL. But the fact is that the Shakespeare brings about, he deals with human conflict, and that's universal, whether it's a boy falling in love with a girl and they're both from the wrong families and they can't be friends, or someone wanting to be king and being fanatical about it, and power going to his head, like Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, or a madness of King Lear. I read a thing interesting. It was talking about Shakespeare and Trump. I thought, well, I guess Shakespeare just goes through every century and has application, I guess. But there definitely some really good. Laura, again, you did mention wait time, and that was big. I think that's probably one of the hardest things to learn. You tend to race through things. Also, bananagrams, and Brittany brought up bananagrams, which I actually don't know what those are. I'm going to look those up. So but I thought it was pretty cool. And also here's something that Brittany brought up. I love using the 3-read method in math for word problems. This is a really big area, math and word problems. And of course, my daughter, a lot of people growing up had word problem issues. This helps all of my students understand the question, including my ELLs, because this way they know what we are talking about. The first read, you ask what we know about the problem. The second read, you ask students about what questions they have about the problem. And the last read, you reveal the actual question, and then you can do the solution. And this is big. Having an organized way to approach word problems. And for people that teach math, and if you can help math teachers, this is big because math is language. The idea that math is pure language all on its own. You can't go and call the police up on 911 and give them a math formula. You have to describe things. On the other hand, you can't solve math problems without putting them into words. It's not, you have to tell what's moving or what's being lost or what's happening and what's the equation. And so it makes it really interesting. Kayla, you mentioned people need to face each other when they talk. I've noticed that nonverbal behavior has to be taught as well as verbal behavior because you don't understand people. Or here's another little more subtle one, is you think about visual expressions that we have. And if someone's from another culture and they don't use that expression, it can cause people to interpret what they're saying as either an insult or they won't understand it. They'll just say what they said was very serious, but they said it with kind of a, without much expression. So I thought they were putting me on. So those are things that are very important. So I don't think I'm going to post all those 10, 10 takeaways. I just want to say that, they were very well done. I mean, there were lists and lists and lists. Sarah Karst, you mentioned children learn language by unconsciously generating rules. When I read this, I had to read it twice because I generally agree with that idea, but never put it into words like this. This is true. Repetition and some repetition is needed because you have to hear something, 8 times before you kind of remember it. I don't know, that's some kind of brain research, but people are actually piecing together the language. If we were to have an exercise where this could be cool to do with students. You have somebody come into the class and they speak a language that none of you know. And so you're able to ask what individual nouns are, and then they have to act out the verbs or something. You can actually have them focus on, for instance, some languages, the verb comes at the end. I think German's that way. In some languages, it's like us, subject, verb, object. Others may have the object before. We kind of do, I gave her the money. I gave her the money. We put the indirect object for the direct object. I don't want to get too grammatical on you. But you can actually do a mystery language and kind of solve it. Like, for instance, so you have a Korean student. And they want to teach a little bit about their language, but rather than give you explicit direct instruction, you have them construct it. And you get the patterns down, and then you figure out what the words are. I had to do this once years ago in a class for college linguistics. And we actually had to study Korean and figure out the patterns based on just, I would say, tell me the word dog, tell me the word pet, tell me the word, and then I would say to them, and they spoke Korean fluently and knew English, I'd say, my pet is a dog, and I would have them give it to me, and I would write it down in a phonetic shorthand, which you really don't have time to teach, but still you could write it down and kind of get the sounds, and then you figure out what is going on in Korean, what is the pattern there. And then you can play around with it and play, you know, depending on your students, you can play more complex things like, what if you substitute another word in? Then what do you get? And then you can kind of compare it. It's kind of like Champion when he figured out what Egyptian was, when he had the Rosetta Stone and he went through it very methodically and figured out that little things like in the writing, of course this is in the writing, you figure it out when you have the cartouche with a circle around it and there's a name in it, that's the name of a famous person or a king or a pharaoh. So once he knew that, then he knew the stuff inside the circle was the name of a famous person. Then he could go about figuring out the verbs and objects and things like that. And of course, written language is very alien, but also writing can be beautiful. I think Japanese, Chinese, any of the pictographs are beautiful. You can integrate that into an art class. All right, well, I've talked enough about it. I just want to tell you how good a job you did on that. I'm sorry it was a little slow, but I just wanted to let you know that I read those and took notes. I'm trying to keep this a little faster. I got a lot of online classes, so I find these discussions really important to you from your own word of mouth. So we're going to keep doing these, and it's the only way we can have communication. I guess we could do the Brady Bunch on here and have all our faces up here talking, but I got a feeling it would slow things down a little bit. I'm always open to Zoom. I love to Zoom, so I can have a couple of you on a time at a Zoom. I haven't really planned on doing that, but no reason not to. Or talk on the phone even, you know. On Zoom, I can show you things. Okay, well, I am going to send this to you, and thanks for that third week. And I wanted to let you know it was gone, but not forgotten. It was very much appreciated.